And again, I always say that there is, not I always say, I've been saying since last night, that if you start in 2010 with the Tea Party absolutely hated the way the country was because they came through the 2008 recession and they said, okay, we're taking stock here. You bailed out Wall Street. You screwed us. You fucked my retirement. Healthcare is more expensive. My life is a genuine mess. And they wiped out, 20 big name Republican incumbents, just destroyed them. And then in 14, they destroyed a bunch of Democratic incumbents. So what happens? So the political establishment in 2016 sees incumbents getting destroyed by both parties. They see this angry, pissed off electorate, and they say, great, here's Hillary Clinton, another Clinton, and fucking Jeb Bush. And they were the two frontrunners. So
Right.
is it any wonder that Trump comes in and does this hostile takeover of the Republican Party? And I think what he has accelerated is, we always say, will there ever be a third party? I think there is. And the third party is the Republican Party because it has nothing to do with the Democratic Party. And if you look at the results in Missouri last night, they were absolutely fascinating and I think make 100% sense. Trump carried, Josh Hawley carried, they passed an abortion rights thing, they increased the minimum wage, and they voted against pay raises for law enforcement. So those four things, you would say, if this was 2010 or 24 or 86, you would say they make no sense at all. In 2024, they make perfect sense. And if you want to understand the modern mean voter, look at Missouri.
I want to add on to your Missouri results. I think North Carolina was a very interesting result as well.
Yeah.
They, at the state level, Democrats swept. The only thing that, at the statewide level, the only thing that went Republican was Trump. Districts level, I'm not saying that, but their
Right.
their governor, their lieutenant governor. So I think that was really interesting. I'm so glad that you said about the third party because I wasn't in a Twitter battle, but there was a messaging person on the left last night on Twitter that said something about, what went wrong, what Democrats or whatever. And they made the statement of like, the ground game didn't matter. And I said, actually, the thing is that Democrats think the game is raising money. Whoever raises the most money is the winner of the game. But the winner of the game is whoever gets the most votes. And Trump, we said before, has so much earned media that it's worth $2 billion in paid media.
Yeah.
I want to add on to that about the party, just to what you said. As I thought about that more, that exchange, what I realized, and I've been saying this for a while, but I didn't really know what I was saying. Kamala brought in Liz Cheney and touted the endorsement of Dick Cheney, and she thought she was courting the Republican Party, what no one has been willing to say or has really made it a pronouncement of. Liz Cheney is no longer a Republican. The Republican Party is not hers.
Yes.
Neither is Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the new party is a I'd rather say it's just a MAGA party, and I don't mean that in the pejorative. Let's just call it that. It is nihilistic, disenfranchised Obama voters to nihilistic to up to your moderate Republican who has always identified as Republican and will stay within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And that is a very large coalition. And I think that's why we saw a landslide.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, we'll differ around the edges on it, but I think that's absolutely hits the nail on the head.
All right. Well, Chris, we were talking a bit before we got started, but now that we're started, I'm a little speechless about how freaking right we were that we said when it breaks, it's going to break one way or the other. Yeah. First of all, we also said that either or both Trump or Biden would not be on the ballot in November. So many things we ended up being right about that I'm a little shocked. I'm really proud to actually say that we kind of saw some of these things happening. Although at the same time, I'm a little overwhelmed at like how I said it almost flippantly, I think before, like those predictions were a little flippant and not really realizing what that would mean. So You've been in the trenches with your campaigns. What does it mean? Tell us. What does it mean?
So I'm gonna do a couple contrary things because I like being contrarian on all this shit.
All right.
Voters gave the Democrats last night basically colonoscopy prep. They jammed all this stuff down their throats. And the good news for Democrats is that now they'll get the shit out. The Clintons, the Obamas, the Bidens, Oprah, the fucking West Wing actors, Bruce Springsteen, all this kind of, 20 years ago fucking nostalgia that they hang on to.
Totally.
That there's some kind of saliency to it. And they're going to be left with, Josh Shapiro, Andy Bashir, Gretchen Whitmer, Gina Raimondo. They're going to be left with a smaller, but a much more interesting bench. And it's inevitable as politics goes back and forth. I mean, since 2010, in every election cycle, except for 2012, the House, the Senate, or the White House changed hands. So we're in this constant kind of voters trying to figure out what it is. And I think that, as suicidal as a lot of Democrats might be, it's also a great opportunity for them because they have no reason to like or trust or believe any of these people again. And the same group of consultants and kids that have been running campaigns as opposed to, professionals that have been pushed out or mitigated a little bit, they got their fucking ass handed to them and they outspent Trump, by close to $1 billion, which a fucking $1 billion is a lot of money. And, so I think it's a good thing for the Democrats. I think it's a good thing for the country, because it gets to move on. And again, I always say that I've been saying since last night, that if you start in 2010 with the Tea Party absolutely hated the way the country was because they came through the 2008 recession and they said, okay, we're taking stock here. You bailed out Wall Street. You screwed us. You fucked my retirement. Healthcare is more expensive. My life is a genuine mess. And they wiped out, 20 big name Republican incumbents, just destroyed them. And then in 2014, they destroyed a bunch of Democratic incumbents. So what happens? So the political establishment in 2016 sees incumbents getting destroyed by both parties. They see this angry, pissed off electorate, and they say, great, here's Hillary Clinton, another Clinton, and fucking Jeb Bush. And they were the two front runners. So is it any wonder that Trump comes in and does this hostile takeover of the Republican Party? And I think what he has accelerated is, we always say, will there ever be a third party? I think there is, and the third party is the Republican Party because it has nothing to do with the Democratic Party. And if you look at the results in Missouri last night, they were absolutely fascinating and I think make 100% sense. Trump carried, Josh Hawley carried, they passed an abortion rights thing, they increased the minimum wage, and they voted against pay raises for law enforcement. So those four things, you would say, if this was 2010 or 24 or 86, you would say they make no sense at all. In 2024, they make perfect sense. And if you want to understand the modern mean voter, look at Missouri.
I want to add, by the way, because I forgot one other thing we were right about. We said there could be a trifecta, and we actually said 2 weeks ago, we said there's a good likelihood there will be a trifecta. I want to add on to your Missouri results. I think North Carolina was a very interesting result as well.
Yeah.
At the state level, Democrats swept. The only thing that, at the statewide level, the only thing that went Republican was Trump. Districts level, I'm not saying that, but their governor, their lieutenant governor. So I think that was really interesting. I'm so glad that you said about the third party because I was I wasn't in a Twitter battle, but there was a messaging person on the left last night on Twitter that said something about, what went wrong, what Democrats or whatever. And they made the statement of like, the ground game didn't matter. And I said, actually, the thing is that Democrats think the game is raising money. Whoever raises the most money is the winner of the game. But the winner of the game is whoever gets the most votes. And Trump, we said before, has so much earned media that it's worth $2 billion in paid media.
Yeah.
I want to add on to that about the party, just to what you said. As I thought about that more, that exchange, what I realized, and I've been saying this for a while, but I didn't really know what I was saying. Kamala brought in Liz Cheney and touted the endorsement of Dick Cheney, and she thought she was courting the Republican Party, what no one has been willing to say or has really made it a pronouncement of. Liz Cheney is no longer a Republican. The Republican Party is not hers.
Yes.
Neither is Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the new party is a I'd rather say it's just a MAGA party, and I don't mean that in the pejorative. Let's just call it that. It is nihilistic, disenfranchised Obama voters to nihilistic to up to your moderate Republican who has always identified as Republican and will stay within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And that is a very large coalition. And I think that's why we saw a landslide.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, we'll differ around the edges on it, but I think that that's absolutely hits the nail on the head. And I think that the other piece of this is that, policy-wise, people pretty much voted. When you look at the ballot initiatives, they pretty much voted for common sense. There wasn't anything that was ideologically crazy. It was kind of mixed. I didn't see how 36 did in California. I'm assuming it's going to pass overwhelmingly. Which was the anti-crime thing. Basically, it rescinds a bunch of lessening of penalties for certain criminal acts, like smash and grabs, minimum stuff. And I think that the other thing, do you follow Brianna Wu at all?
No, I don't.
Okay, Brianna Wu is a trans woman. I guess I should say woman, but she's a trans woman and a Democratic activist, who is kind of a lightning rod for a lot of the trans activist community, because she says, "Are you people fucking crazy?" She said that like the argument should be that like if you are trans, you should be able to get the operation, you get your hormone, and you should be able to go and live with your life. She said this kind of activist mentality, and the reason I'm going to loop this back to Trump, this activist mentality that, you can get ostracized unless you use the right pronouns, that, you all you have to do is self-identify to go into a certain locker room, that, that physically, that, non-transitional trans men can compete by self-identifying in women's sport, stuff like that. And she says, you all sound crazy to everybody else but yourselves. And to the average person, it sounds crazy. And so when Trump did, the most money he spent on any ad was on the trans spot. Was Harris talking about, taxpayer funded money for military and for prisoners to have trans operations. And in the clip you see, it's, 2019 or 2020, whatever it was. And she's enthusiastic about it and bubbly about it. And if you're a normal person, you say, are you out of your fucking cotton picking mind? It's like, it makes no sense to anybody. Now you can say, well, the courts are going to mandate. You could do some legalese questions, but as a question of, do I think like you? Do I feel you? Do I understand you? That means you don't. And so Trump ran that spot more than any other spot he ran because it said to voters, she doesn't understand you at all.
I saw it here, and I saw that spot here in Texas. I think it was the right one where she's doing an interview with a trans woman.
Yeah.
I think is the one you're talking about. Yeah, I thought it was a very effective spot, especially maybe depending on where they were running it. I mean, I certainly think it may not do well in California, but I think it did well here in Texas, and it probably did well in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, like
Yeah.
where
And again, I don't think the spot.
they're not a coastal liberal.
Yeah, and I think the spot, I mean, apparently there were a couple of versions of it, but it didn't overstep. It didn't. It was careful. It was about trans, but it was about her being a bridge too far on it.
Right.
And
Right.
and the fact of the matter is that when they talk about, oh, we're not teaching kids their gender and stuff like that. Yeah, you are. And because the textbooks exist, and you can say that, okay, this is just something we tried, and like whole word reading, and this was a really bad idea. We're going to, like, you can do that, and people are going to go, okay, I kind of get it. The pendulum swings back and forth. But to say that, like, if you don't support this, it's genocide, or you're a hater, and it's like, no, I'm just like and it's
Yeah.
and it raises the intensity and the velocity on it. And again, I have a couple of friends that have trans children, that are adults, and it's like a really hard personal thing. But like, I guarantee none of them are saying, that, like, okay, we should give tax dollars for convicted murderer to get his fucking identity changed.
Right.
You
And then, or put a self-identifying woman, XX chromosome person who identifies as a woman into a woman's only prison. That people are like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
It's interesting that we bring this up because I agree that this was effective. But one of the things that I saw people already bashing Democrats on was doubling on the kind of culture attacks, the kind of like culture war path. But this is actually the same thing. It's the same. You're playing the culture war because let's be truthful. I think for me, I completely disagree with most of the woke trans forcing it on people. It is such a minority issue that it is irrelevant to my voting for me.
Yeah.
So to play it up, I think it's actually a red herring in some ways, though, is like Democrats are playing the culture war up, and they need to actually alter to bread and butter issues, which is what I was reading was they should have gone the Bernie Sanders route.
Yes.
And then you point out that this is one of the most effective spots, and it reminds people why they're a bridge too far. So how do you square that circle? How do you, is it simply that, no, it's not that Democrats shouldn't use culture war stuff. It's that they're wrong on the culture war stuff as far as where the country is.
They shouldn't use culture. I mean, as a practical political standard, you should not promote and yell about stuff that nobody agrees with. I mean,
Right.
So, Andy Bashir, they tried, the Republicans tried to attack him, very similar on trans stuff in Kentucky. And it wasn't as clear cut, and they didn't have video of him making an ass of himself. But they tried to do that, but it didn't work. And if anything, it backfired because people went, nah, it's too far and he's too sensible. And we know Andy, and the policy was sensible. And basically the policy was, I think, that was because the courts mandated that it had to happen. The state needed to let it happen. And it's one thing to say, well, I have to follow the judge and that's the law. And people kind of like, I don't like it. But as opposed to saying, I'm going to ensure that every convicted murderer can change their, and you kind of go, what are you nuts? And the same thing with with men and women's prisons and stuff. And again, I always call it the UFO thing. You can have a neighbor who is have I told you this before? My UFO.
No, I'm excited to hear it though.
You can have a next door neighbor who's a great person, and they take your newspaper in when you're on vacation, and they're always checking up on you. And when you're sick, they say, I haven't seen you. Can I bring you some? And they can do all that stuff. They're the greatest neighbor in the world. The one thing they believe in is UFOs. And you kind of go, Okay, a lot of people believe in UFOs. All this person does in every fucking conversation, whether you're talking about the Super Bowl or the Academy Awards or the price of steak, is somehow start talking about UFOs and,
Right.
men from another dimension or another planet or whatever the fuck. And it's like, and that's all they ever talk about. What do you do with that person? You say, hi, Chris. And you kind of stay the fuck away from them because you don't want to deal with their insanity. And I think a lot of times Democrats and Republicans too, but I think, Democrats in this, since we're talking about they're losing, we'll talk about Democrats. They talk about this stuff and like it's normal and like this is a conversation everybody has. And by the way, and the right wing does this with God and guns. It's
Yep.
one thing, do you believe in God? Yeah, I believe in Jesus. I believe in redemption. I believe what happens to be, or I believe, Second Amendment and kind of that. But it's like, yeah, we need an Uzi in every classroom, or, there can be no restrictions on anything, or, or it's like,
Yeah.
we need to bow down to Brahma before school. I mean,
Right. Right. Right.
and it's the same
Yeah.
kind of thing that like normal people go, what the fuck is the matter with you? And that's not a great place to start a campaign from.
Yeah. I mean, so it's funny. Okay. So you talked about kind of, these are my words, not yours, but this is what I thought about coming into our conversation today, is that there needs to be a decapitation of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Like you need to cut the head off.
Yeah.
Chuck Schumer needs to go, Nancy Pelosi, probably Hakeem Jeffries, and even at the DNC level, like people just need to go. It's too elitist, it's too liberal, it's too coastal, it's too out of the realm of normal. I'd say all of that kind of lead up to about your point, which is I think the biggest thing that we saw is that, and we touched on it in previous episode, the brand of Democrat is not in line with where the American people are.
Right.
I don't actually think, in looking at the races one by one, that some of them should have lost on their own merit. I think they lost because they were Democrats.
Yeah.
And so then that leads me to the question. I mean, you brought up Shapiro and Andy Bashir. I'm curious about, so for senators, I think Chuck Schumer needs to go. In fact, I think he should resign. I think AOC should take his seat. She should run for a seat. I think he's done. I just think he's out of touch and he's old and he needs to go. The bigger thing though is like, what are your thoughts on like some of who's the next leadership at the Senate level? In my mind, I was thinking like maybe Klobuchar, she's an upper Midwest person. You have Stabenow from Michigan. I think I was like thinking in my mind, like Fetterman from Pennsylvania. These are kind of, sometimes they're a little out there in what they say, but they're very they're not, in my opinion, separated from the majority. They are sometimes separated from their base, but not from the majority, really.
Yeah. Let me,
what are your thoughts on that?
But here's what I think.
Okay. And then we can all talk about why you're tired, and we'll talk a bit about the campaigns you worked on.
Yeah.
All right. So you're now caffeinated.
Yeah. Replacing leadership. And I think the problem with replacing Schumer is he raises so much money. And that's going to be an issue for Democrats. But in terms of generational stuff, again, when I was talking about my, colonoscopy prep, add Schumer and Pelosi into it, and Pelosi's gone. So, but it's, nobody wants to see these people. And Fetterman is a really interesting choice. And if you're a Democrat and you are looking for a role model electorally, you could do a lot worse than John Fetterman. He's got a, idiosyncratic personal style, which I don't always agree with. He votes with Democrats 98% of the time. At the same time, on the cultural stuff, and I'm gonna tiptoe past. He's very pro-Israel. I want to tiptoe past that because
very pro-Israel. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that culturally, he feels like everybody in Pennsylvania I know. I mean, and you can picture, and I have seen Fetterman actually having talks with normal people and people that don't like him. I mean, Fetterman's gone into the Lion's Den on Fox and a bunch of different places, on Joe Rogan, You see him on Joe Rogan. He was great on Joe Rogan. And it's just like, and you go, this is a normal guy. And this is a guy that, like, even though I don't agree with him politically, I mean, he's voting Democratic Party line 90% of the time, but it's a guy that culturally I think isn't going to betray me, and Klobuchar, maybe too, but they kind of feel that way. I mean, I think one of the big surprises, and I think it's interesting to talk about, that initially everybody was like, holy shit, JD Vance is a disaster. JD Vance became like the best of all four candidates. And, when he was especially going on, kind of antagonistic talk shows, and antagonistic interviews, and more than holding his own, but giving the troops a rallying cry. And Tim Walz at some point he morphed from every dad to like, well, that's cousin Tim. He's okay, but we don't talk about him a lot. I mean, he kind of became that at some point. He can become a serious guy. I think JD Vance kind of went, all right, I don't agree with this, but he came off as you can see why he's successful in life. And you see his wife and family and you kind of go, oh, I get it. Walz was like, well, Minnesota, and you kind of lose your mind at a certain point on that. And
you raised something interesting. Yeah.
No,
sorry, please.
Vance is I will call him, a polished Fetterman. Vance is absolutely an elite. He's an elite's elite, but at the same time, he kind of knows where he grew up and he can still talk to those people. And he can have normal conversations. I think he's much more comfortable now in the faculty lounge than the factory floor, but he can still give that body language up. And
the interesting thing is to me, when I look at JD Vance, just on a personal level, when I look at him, it reminds me of code switching, the way that Democrats try to call out Kamala Harris for speaking more like a black woman when she's in front of a black audience and stuff like that. I think that JD Vance code switches his behavior when he wants to play up the idea that he's Appalachian when I don't think he is. And to be honest with you, many diehard MAGA people that I know here in outer part of like rural Austin, they don't trust JD Vance. You know what I mean? They didn't vote for JD Vance. They voted for Donald Trump. So I think it remains to be seen about JD Vance's future beyond where he is now. And there's something very authentic about Fetterman. I absolutely loathe the fact that he doesn't wear a suit and they change rules. Yeah. I think don't show up looking like you're going to a fucking barbecue. But there is an authenticity about him. Even when I disagree with him on certain things, he doesn't strike me as code switching, which is also the strength of Donald Trump, by the way. Is like, I don't think he does that either. He will talk to an audience the same way and be very disrespectful to them, but authentic, because that's what he thinks, and he tells them, he talks to them like he wants to talk to them. But this is all making me ask you about a bigger point. This is episode 49, and even before that, you and I have talked around Fantasy Elect and everything. We've talked a lot about what the candidates have done. We've talked a lot about the debate. We talked about the results of the two conventions. We talked about the first debate with Biden. One of the things that makes me is, did any of that even matter? Was this all a foregone conclusion? And the thing I would say in defense of that perspective is that in the last week, we saw Donald Trump blowing a microphone. We saw a rally at Madison Square Garden that, for all intents and purposes, didn't play well PR-wise outside of that in the media cycle. All of those things that you would normally, and this goes back to grab them by the pussy. Everybody thought, oh, your campaign is done. Is it just a foregone conclusion? People know what they want to do early on. I don't believe anybody's undecided really anymore. And they just look for a rationale that would justify the decision.
I think that's a legitimate point of view. I disagree with it because you can see stuff move within the marginals. I would argue that people have always known who Trump is, and none of it's surprising. None of it at all. They know the guy's allowed, and okay, we get that. Madison Square Garden, Puerto Rican garbage thing. which everybody thought was, or a lot of the media thought this was a turning point in how appalling. Well, how appalling to Latinos. And Trump winds up getting a record amount of Latino vote. And I think the answer is that they don't like it, but they live in a grown-up world of insults, and their lives are worse under Biden, and inflation and the economy are worse under Biden. Have got worse under Biden, and so I think that they put aside, they do something very mature and sophisticated. They put aside their personal views about somebody, and they vote for who they think is going to do a better job on an issue. And I think that's a really sophisticated vote. I think that the part of the problem for Democrats is that they don't understand that fundamental, and they think it's, say Latinx again. That's great. But I think the voters sophisticated.
Can I push back on that for 1 second?
Yeah.
Can I just push back on that for 1 second and see where you take this thought that I have? Is it a sophisticated vote? Because at the same time, people in the debate and multiple times that I've seen, the Nobel laureate economists in our country, everyone says that the economic policies of tariffs and all of those things that by Trump, if you look at it, the economy is going to do worse under Trump. So I think what you said I would be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. If at the same time, the economists were saying, Kamala Harris is going to fuck the economy up. But if they're saying, actually, her version is going to be better, if not still flawed, let's say they're both going to be flawed in ways, to believe that. So I guess that's the part that doesn't make sense to me, is that you're being told by people who look at these numbers, this is a potential catastrophe, all of these tariffs. And at the same time, you say, well, we're doing this for our economic interests, even though this guy said this about us.
Yeah. And I think this goes to a bigger picture. This is actually really kind of a great conversation. And two things. And actually, just before we jumped on, I was having this discussion with two very good friends of mine. And much like Trump, two very close friends, dear friends, the best friends.
Were they big burly guys with tears in their eyes?
Tears in their eyes. They don't cry because they're real men, but I can't do I can't do impressions. But they're also concerned. They're going to consult their financial planners, and I also said, consult your tax people too, because the tax cuts run out next year, and SALT kicks back in. I mean, and if taxes are in April, there's no way any of this shit's going to be resolved. So it's going to be a giant shit show. I mean, it's going to be. I think Trump will be the full employment president for financial planners and tax experts. But here's why. But I also said, if you go back and you look at 2016, Larry Summers, Paul Krugman, there wasn't a single mainstream entity that didn't say Donald Trump is going to cause a recession and a worldwide recession. And you kind of Google, Trump recession 2016. And you have article after article. So if you are an average person, and you know that because you lived through that, but I think it goes to what I will call expert credibility. And I think this is a larger thing that I have not I'm going to poorly articulate it. But you've got what I'll call this great unwashed mass of working class people. And over the past 4 years, you could be censored if you said, I think COVID was probably a lab leak, and people lost their fucking minds. There was the Covington kids with the Indian, with the guy, I think they called him sitting bullshit artist, which was totally wrong. The media lost their minds. There were Russian bounties, there were P tapes, Hunter's laptop was disinformation. There was the Russian server in Trump. There are all these kind of things that have been proven demonstrably wrong or fundamentally wrong. And it wasn't just that they've been proven wrong. It's that if you had, another example, during COVID, you could send your kids to private school, but you couldn't send them to public school. You could go to a fucking bar, but you couldn't go to the beach. And, and the country switched from, I'm not going to take Trump's vaccine like he's making it in the fucking White House bathtub with Ivanka, to we should fire, 2 months later, we should fire people who aren't vaccinated. And I think that it's not just the shifting and the wrongness, it's that this kind of moral condescension that happened with all of them. And especially when you go back, I mean, people, kind of flaring their nostrils about everything. Oh, how can you believe that? Oh, it's Russian disinformation, or you must be a racist, or, that's not being done. Crazy shit. And I think that the experts and the kind of intellectual policy class have lit themselves on fucking fire over the past 8 years. And so when you say, and by the way, I agree, that the tariffs would be absolutely the wrong fucking thing, and it's going to be it's going to be a disaster. When they say that, if you're a normal person and not parsing this closely, you go, well, what have you fucking people been right in the past 4 years? I mean, the same people that were, another thing is that, like, a week before he dropped out, the New York Times was running articles about how Joe Biden's sharp as a tack, and he's, when he's not on camera, he's, memorizing the periodic table backwards while he does downward dog yoga on, parallel bars. I mean, which everybody knew was kind of bullshit, a lie. And I think that what's happened is that
of course.
I think experts have shredded it's the old, the boy who cried wolf. And, so to ask voters to say, well, all these people saying that Trump's policy is bad now and it's going to be a disaster and it's going to be $7 trillion in deficits and it's batshit and no taxes on tips is all, like, you can say all that shit is batshit economically crazy. The problem is the people saying that are the people who have not told you the truth for almost a decade. And I think that is part of the problem. I think that, the media industry, the expert industry, NGOs, all of these people are getting their comeuppance now, that they're simply no longer trusted. And I think that, so to your point, why didn't that resonate is because they have no credibility. And by the way, I think they're right. I think they're right on the Trump tariffs, and I think that's a stupid economic policy. But
okay, I mean, I think there was something you said in there as well. Was like, it could be because when there's something, when you like to swing a hammer, everything can look like a nail. I'm very interested in culture, and I think that culture explains a lot of it, actually.
Oh yeah.
I think there, what's the there's like a mental model like Occam's razor or whatever, but it's like the less you know about something, the more of an expert you think you are. I don't remember whose name it is. That
is it Kruger-Dunning?
No, oh yeah, the Dunning-Kruger effect. That's right. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I think to some degree it's like, would you want one guy who is the manager of a McDonald's, which is probably a really well-paying job, by the way, so I'm not knocking that.
Yeah.
But would you want that person to run a war, or would you want an expert that has been in war, has studied war? Now, that doesn't mean that the outcome is assured, but I think that there are reasons that people become experts in things. The same reason that I wouldn't want to drive a car that was designed by a guy who is a farmer. You know what I mean? Even though there have been farmers throughout history that have designed things that are amazing, but on a repetitive basis, you can be wrong. And I 100%, though, by the way, agree with you. I absolutely loathe Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think he's horrible for science for this very reason. I think he has no credibility, but he makes too many statements as if he knows the truth about things that are actually scientific theories, not laws. That's my little rant on Neil deGrasse Tyson. But to your point, I think that there are a lot of experts who make bold pronouncements and they believe that they have the right to enforce that as the truth for everyone, and it does cost them credibility. It seems to me, though, that in the art of the expert class, if you want to call it that, there is a truth in that goes beyond a guy who has bankrupted 3 of his companies. Yeah. And I don't think he's ever had a successful company. The only thing I think he's ever done successfully is be a TV star and run for office. So which one would you say has the higher likelihood of accuracy would be my point. But I think culturally is where the shift happens. Culturally, if you don't have a cultural respect for the expert class, if you have a cultural respect for highly educated people that specialize, then you're going to not accept it. Do you think I'm off on that, or?
No. I think that's right. I hear you on Trump, and I largely agree. But you can also do that. Hillary Clinton was basically a insignificant senator and a politician's wife before she ran.
100%.
I could say Secretary
Totally
of
agree.
State, but I mean, and so you kind of, shred that a couple ways. But again, in terms of the expert stuff, yeah. I mean, by the way, a quick story on Farmer. When you said Farmer, wouldn't want a guy to design a car.
But can I add something about what you just said really quickly though? But to your point, I don't think Hillary Clinton was qualified to be a senator from New York. And if when she was running and she was running against somebody else and she said something and the experts were like, Hillary Clinton's full of shit, my default would have been like, Hillary Clinton's full of shit.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's where I fall on that, because I agree. Hillary Clinton's a great example.
Yeah. So here's my quick former engineer thing, and it's a campaign story. I was in South Dakota, and we were in, I think, a place called Lead, and there was this guy there, and he was a farmer, and this is old Bob. Hey, Bob, I'm shooting your farm. He goes, oh, that's fine. Yeah, this is candidate, and this is the candidate, Larry Pressler, senator. I go, oh, good to meet you, like that. And so we're doing stuff, and I said, well, he's a nice guy, nice old guy. And he said, yeah, he's worth about $1 billion, but he had like the overalls and stuff. And so it's a great story. So he was the guy. Well, he figured out, because if you're a farmer, you've got, floods and droughts, and during the floods, and you've got this tremendous amount of mud that you have to move.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to move out of fields or in field. I mean, and I
didn't know that.
Son-in-law was an engineer, and basically he was like, well, how if we use this kind of idea that we have with the combine and make this a mud pusher thing? And they kind of created this high, super duper, they kind of like made it in their fucking garage, this kind of, the prototype anyway, this kind of mud mover that worked great. So in 1991, when the Gulf War started, basically, they set fires to all the Kuwaiti oil fields, right? Remember that?
Right. Yeah.
And they're like, what the fuck do we do with this? And Red Adair was involved. And somebody said, old Bob's got something I think's going to work. And basically the Saudis and the royal families in Qatar, they bought old Bob's device, and Bob supervised the manufacturing. And so basically it became the standard, the world standard for moving oil and oil spills and oil damage, because you needed something that wasn't clogged. And he explained it to you. And I can't remember, he explained it to me in a real simple way. I was like, well, how does it work? And basically he said the problem is it gets clogged at a certain point in the pipeline because it's too thick, it's too heavy. And so you have to let air in, and then you have to have like valves that open and shut along the way to push it along. But if you do it at all at high speed, it can all move at high speed. And I think he said the hard part was figuring out but it was like something they just kind of figured it anyway. But old Bob was old Bob's a billionaire. But that's my farmer story. But no,
shit, it's almost like a stomach where you're like pushing it along, kind of, right, at rapid speed.
Yeah, but he kind of figured out how to do that with mud on the farm, and then it became like an industrial thing, but he became super rich.
This fucking guy turns into a billionaire.
Yeah, and he loves being a farmer. And he was still on the farm, and he was still doing his shit, and he had the Oshkosh along with that. I mean, he looked like some. I mean, we said, can we put you in this? And he was like, yeah, because he looked like Central Casting farmer. You do rural farmer, like that's the guy. And you could buy and sell it. And there's some.
5 will get you 10 that his grandkids will never be farmers.
Yeah. His grandkids are squandering their fortune. You never know. I mean,
they're gonna be spending grandpa's money.
People I know that are farmers love being farmers, and they just love everything about it. And I know one guy who's super wealthy from like farm family stuff, and sold it to like ADM or some damn thing at some point, and just got a few money. But he still runs a farm because he loves getting up at 4 a.m. and doing all that crap. And not for me, but he just loves that. And it's like,
Wow.
But
No, I mean, I think we're at an interesting time. The funny thing is I don't want to oversell my belief in experts either. I actually believe in generalists quite a bit. And there are many stories where somebody applies what they know in farming or in something and they solve a completely different problem. I mean, let's take a look at some of the ballot initiatives really quickly. I think abortion was an interesting one. Obviously, it was the big one that drove a lot. That's actually a really good point. Like, are you at all shocked at the lack of effect that women had on the election overall?
I think it's because, well, college educated women voted for Harris overwhelmingly, and it was like almost like a 30-point gap. And that doesn't surprise me. Abortion didn't resonate as much with younger women and Gen X women and millennial women. What it really resonated with, and don't hate me for saying this, is menopausal boomer women, because they remember it, because they remember a time when they were in their late teens, early 20s, when you start having sex, that abortion wasn't legal.
Yeah.
And, a not go back thing. But if you lived with refrigeration, if you lived with air conditioning all your life, you think, okay, we're going to take your air conditioning away. No, fuck you, right? But I didn't think there were coattails on a lot of these things that I thought would be coattails on it, just because people separate these out. And it would actually be a really good podcast. I'd like to get somebody else on that's more of an expert on it. But my theory that you familiar with the play The Monkey's Paw?
Okay. That name sounds familiar, but I've never seen it.
So there's a famous play. It's like a 2-act play that they do in high schools, or used to do in high schools before it got crazy. And what it is a working class family who says, we need a new car, we need a house, and I just wish if I could just get $10,000, all my cares will be gone. And they meet a gypsy, or a wife comes home with something, and it's a monkey's paw. It's like Larry Monkey's paw. And I bought this at from the gypsy, and she says, if you just rub it, and you get 3 wishes on it, and they will all come true. And the old man's like, oh, fuck you, right? And so she says, we wish we had $10,000, fade black, fade up. Their son has just been killed in a factory accident, and his life insurance is $10,000. And everybody goes, oh, God. And then this kind of goes around for the second act. And she says, I wish my son were alive. I wish my son were alive. I wish my son were alive. And he comes back, but as a dead zombie person banging on the door. And it's a great high school play. It's the scariest shit. And then for the third wish, she wishes, I wish my son dead and at peace. And that's the third wish. But they call it the monkey's paw. So I think in a lot of ways, abortion is the monkey's paw of American politics, because Republicans campaigned on it and campaigned for, overturning Roe, whatever they say they were doing. That's kind of what you're. And they said, overturn Roe, overturn Roe, overturn Roe. And all of a sudden, you get wiped out because you overturn Roe. And I think, though, and Democrats are going, let's put all this abortion stuff on the ballot, and let's do abortion, abortion, abortion. And everybody goes, okay, yeah, and now it's settled.
Right.
And I think that,
and now you've taken it away.
We've taken it away. So literally they need that tort. And again, I don't think it's settled, but I think it will be settled over the next 8 years, because even states, that have incredibly restrictive abortion laws, there's going to be an election cycle where they're going to punish 20 state senators and kick them out because of it. And they'll pass something, and you're going to have
so. You think so?
Yeah. And you're going to have this thing where you're going to have an abortion policy that's going to be in different states somewhere between 8 and 20 weeks. And it's going to be kind of settled. And I think that's the way it turns out. And there might be, Louisiana might be the outlier, right?
Don't sell Texas short.
Yeah. But I think what's going to happen is with, especially with Latino women who are strongly pro-choice, I think I just think it changes over time. But I think that, Republicans and Democrats both got what they wanted, not the way they thought they were going to get it. And I think that and I think one of the reasons that abortion didn't have the resonating effect that Mumbert thought it was because it was all on the ballot. It was all over the ballots. And so you can say, well, I can vote for Trump and vote pro-choice, right? I'm taking care of that.
That's a very good point. It takes away the appeal of putting somebody else in power to take care of it for you.
Yeah. And I think that is, it's hot in here. And I think that is kind of it's a monkey's paw thing.
Before we wrap up, I know that you worked on a couple of House races. Whatever you can share with us, did you have a good night? Your candidates, did you have a good night?
I don't know, because they're still counting.
Okay.
I did a race. I did North Carolina, where the real battle was in, because we were talking about North Carolina earlier. The real battle's in the Republican primary. And we had an 8-way primary. We spent the least amount of money of the 4 major candidates, and we won because I think we were a little smarter. We made it to the runoff, and we uncovered a bunch of bad stuff about our opponent, who they tried to make a MAGA Republican, and really what she was a, in terms of the parlance, a rhino. And I think she's kind of relieved that she lost. And frankly, my candidate's super moderate. I mean, he was working for the Obama Justice or the Biden Justice Department, for Christ's sake. So I had that.
But his attack on the other Republican was a rhino. Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah. We were putting drug dealers and illegal immigrants behind bars. She was a rhino.
Yeah.
Right.
Got it.
The
smart
mayor's race in San Diego, which is weird because they stopped posting results on it. But I had a guy, and it was kind of an interesting race, that our guy was the independent, and the mayor is hated so much, he became a thing, and a rich guy wrote a check for like $1.5 million, and we just did an IE, and I think we fall short because part of the problem is that 60%'s voting for Harris, 60%'s voting for Schiff. And then you'd have to go down and across to find the independent, who didn't have hard damage.
Right.
But I think we're going to lose that. And then California 13 up in Bakersfield, Central Valley area. I mean, it's between Fresno and Sacramento. And incumbent John Duarte, who's running a rematch against Adam Gray. And I did the independent expenditure, one of them up there. And it was basically all Spanish. We did all Spanish. And our stuff was pretty good.
That's a great segue. Well, congratulations on your races. The way they're going, maybe some you'll win, maybe one you won't, it sounds like. But they're still counting, so who knows?
I think I win the 13th. I think I lose San Diego.
Okay. I mean, the 13th would certainly, I guess both the 13th and North Carolina would make sense for keeping the House Republican, right? You're definitely going to be part of that wave. I sent you something, I think it was last night or the night before on Twitter, the Recount podcasting. They were talking about Spanish radio.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like you have a little bit of experience with that. I didn't quite realize. I mean, so the last thing I think we should end with a little bit for time is, and this is going to be an entree into this subject, is media being dead and being disparate, decentralized media. This was new to me about Spanish language radio. I don't even really listen to the radio. Reminds me a little bit of like the Rush Limbaugh days, but for the Spanish version. And listening to them talk about it, it sounds like Spanish radio is actually different. It's not just talk radio. It's talk radio. It's sports. It's music. It's everything. But it sounds like it's incredibly powerful, and the average listen time is like 6 hours a day. Is that where you were running your things? Do you focus on that at all, or do you know about it?
Yeah. So Mike is right. It's very powerful, and we did that. What we have found in terms of media being dead, that's essentially true. And there's a whole discussion about how much better the Trump media buy was than the Harris media buy. If anything, they had too much money, and they were just dumping money and stupid. It was a very lazy buy. How about that? Each audience in each election, this becomes really hard, is now becoming a custom audience. And that it used to be when I started out, you would buy network TV, bunch of radio, some mail, and that was the campaign. Then you had cable, and then you had now, like, for instance, in San Diego, 50% of San Diego watches streaming entirely. So if you want to talk to half the population down there, you go on YouTube and Hulu and Paramount, and that's it. And and the only time you really want to do broadcast, I'm oversimplifying it, is when you're doing live sports. And even with live sports now, you go to YouTube, right?
Streaming services.
Streaming, man.
Yeah.
And so that's the case. But, one of the reasons that I think campaigns fail in kind of the voodoo that I do is they don't spend a lot of time actually thinking about how people are getting their information, what their eco stream is. And Latino stuff is very Latino written is very powerful. And I sent you a month ago, I said I think this is the best spot Kamala Harris did. And it was a syndicated Latino and they ran it in Pennsylvania. And it was a syndicated Latino music talk show host. And I said, because it was really simple, clear. I liked the guy, and he was credible, and he knew what he was talking about. And I think that means something. And also, I think if you were in a heavy Latino place, there's this cross-culture stuff. Like if you go in the middle of Connecticut, if you're Anglo and you're working in a supermarket, you're hearing Latino radio all day. And you can probably do some, if you're in Waterbury, Connecticut, you probably, even if you were, raised white and Polish, you probably can speak a little Pigden Spanish.
Sure. Sure. On the media aspect, I thought it was really kind of stupid that Kamala did Saturday Night Live. I don't know anybody who watches Saturday Night Live anymore.
Well, but Saturday Night Live and an Oprah rally with fucking Bruce Springsteen, who, by the way, looks like Tilda Swinton.
Yeah.
And they were doing West Wing stuff, and it just kind of
Bradley Whitford and shit.
And you hear that, and you kind of go, oh my God, no! I mean, this is like me, going back to like I have on the wall back there, 1970s hockey, and I love it, and I can talk about it and deal with it forever, but I'm not going to convince anybody to like hockey as much as I do by talking about shit that's way in the past. And that's what this is. I mean, the West Wing is like, what? And again, Oprah, what? I mean, I guess Springsteen has cachet, but I think it's, but all that shit is old. It's old, man.
Yeah. I actually saw an exit interview where the guy said he was undecided, but then eventually decided to go for Trump because Kamala didn't do Joe Rogan. And I thought, yep, that kind of makes sense. Like, she didn't go to where those people are. You know what I mean?
And the idea that Rogan is the kind of right-wing guy, he endorsed Bernie Sanders, and he's kind of a wake and bake. I mean, I'm not a listener. I mean, I know he is. I listen to excerpts and stuff. But he always strikes me as like kind of a wake and bake bro. I mean, he's not an ideologue.
Yeah.
And
but I think he is part of that. He is part of that disenfranchised Obama. I think he fits squarely into how I see the MAGA coalition. He is that like farther to the left to almost becoming anarchist in a way.
Yeah.
To some degree. So I think he fits in that.
I saw Fetterman. Fetterman was on, and I saw clips of him with Fetterman on, and it was a bro conversation, and it was very listenable. But the idea that you're going to go on, she's your daddy or who's your daddy, whatever that was, and you are going to like, okay, great, I get you do it. I mean, I think you do all these things, but you're not going to go on a podcast that has 19 fucking million daily listeners of a demographic that you really need. Is insane because, and again, and it's not like he's going to ask he's not going to ask a gotcha question or a pointed question. I mean, I thought he nailed Trump on election denial stuff.
Totally.
Totally right. And it's like, but he didn't but it wasn't pedantic, and it wasn't like, well, now you're saying that he just kind of he kind of rolled him in on the thing, and then he moved it on because the point was made. And that's the worst he's going to do to you. And, and she could have sounded like a, human being.
She should have done Joe Rogan instead of Brit Baier, honestly. Like, that wasn't,
Yeah.
she shouldn't have done Brit Baier.
Yeah. And and by the way, that goes to show we're talking about like antiquated people. It's that like, we have to go into the Dragon's Den. We're going to put you on Fox News and have you get the shit beat out of you because we think it's 2012 again. We think it's 2008.
Right.
When the answer is Rogan, who is, very 2020s. But I think that the Harris people were 15, 20 years behind the ball.
Totally. And you said that they're all former Obama that haven't run a race since like 08, basically. So, well, I just want to throw it to you for the last words. Where do we go from here? What do you foresee happening between now and Inauguration Day? And what should people look for? We're going to run some legislative contests. What do you think people should look for as priorities right away? That, first 100 days is what people talk about. What do you think are the priorities of a Trump-Vance administration with a trifecta government?
Yeah, the piece they're going to have to answer, and good fucking luck with this, is the basically the Trump tax cut that was passed in 17, 18, I don't even know. But anyway, it expires.
Yeah, 17, I think.
It expires next year.
Yeah, next year.
And so either everybody's going to have to see, either he's going to go into his first couple months of office, first quarter in office, presiding over a tax increase for everybody, or he's going to have this giant fight to do this again, and it allows Democrats to do tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. Or he gets a tax increase. So is there a third option somebody can figure out, because, the SALT thing would kick back into, which is, I live in California, so it would benefit me. But I think screwing people on SALT is probably a good idea politically, because those states didn't vote for him. And I think you punish those people because there's no political ramifications for you. But, so I think that's the big thing. And I think the trade thing, I think NAFTA expires too at some point next year, or has to be reauthorized.
The MC. Oh, okay, yeah. I didn't know that.
I'm not sure that, but I think that's down the road because you can't do, you can't do that. I think Ukraine funding is going to be interesting, and Israel funding. I mean, I don't think there's going to be any issue with Israel funding.
I was going to ask you under the number of days before Ukraine loses part of its territory to Russia. Actually, that's exactly what I was going to ask you. Your over under on.
Yeah, and it may wind up, because again, I think if somebody makes the case to Trump that you'll be seen as the strongest leader in the history of America if you back the Ukraine to defeat the number one enemy in the world, Vladimir Putin, you can convince him to do that. Because I think it's just, he likes power, he likes big. I would be counterintuitive on that. If I was Zelensky, I would start dressing in a hat with a bunch of medals and shit and a Hugo Boss jacket. He should start, looking like the gall lighter of Kyiv. But, but I think that's going to be the biggest problem. And again, I think, but I think the Democrats have a problem too, is that they're going to do well in 2026 just by not being Trump. Because, if your car got a flat, if your dog got pregnant, if you cut your finger on your screen door, it's the Republicans' fault because they're in charge. And that's going to be 2026. It will be interesting to see if the remnants of the rotting corpses of the Democratic Party try to retain power, or like the AOCs and the Josh Shapiros and the Gretchen Whitmers try to kick them out.
Yeah.
By the way, what's going to be really interesting is that I think something to look at is going to be the new Republican Senate Majority Leader, who that's going to be.
Yeah. And you said last time you think it's going to be Thune, right? Yeah,
and I think Thune is going to be super popular because, he's kind of I wouldn't say a movie star good-looking guy, but a TV good-looking guy. And he comes off.
He's a matinee idol.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he's not Brad Pitt kind of looking, but he looks like,
Yeah, yeah.
he would be on a streaming service about a private eye. I mean, he could pull that off.
Right.
A
Right.
rancher. He would be
Right.
a guest. He would have a sizable role in Horizon, in the Costner thing, right? Uh, but
Yeah.
so I think he
Okay.
will be in. And again, I
And
mean,
do you think there'll be any surprises between now and Inauguration Day?
no, I do think what's going to be interesting is that in 2016 there was an entire industry that kind of sprouted up about, I'll call it, the resistance, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
everybody remade, like networks remade their news programs and how they talked about things, frankly, to capitalize on that. I wonder if all that energy is out of the bag. You
That'll
know,
be interesting to see.
my friend Will Bunch is a friend, syndicated columnist, and he's the wokest person I know. Is basically doing we will be in gulags by February, stuff. But I wonder if he's going to be the outlier now. But I wonder if
Interesting.
there's any energy there to hear that, because you can only hear that. It's exhausting, and I think that
Yeah.
and the greatest thing Trump could do, if he never will, is just kind of disappear and become Eisenhower and go golf,
Right.
and show up
It's
once a
funny
week.
that you say that. I actually think that the groundwork is already set for an improving economy, and I think actually the less Trump does, the better
Yeah,
off he'll be.
yeah, I agree.
I think if he gets in and he starts trying to fiddle under the hood, I think he's going to fuck a lot of things up. I think he
Yeah,
should just write it and take credit for it.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and that's kind of that'd be the smartest thing to do, and
Yeah.
just anyway. All right, man.
All right. All right. Thanks, Chris. We're in a new world now. We're in a Trump admin, so I'll see you next week.
Sounds good.
All right. There you have it. Listen, I think by this point, that's going to see this knows the results. We covered it in depth. So if you watch the episode, you know where we are. We're in a second Trump administration. By the way, we didn't talk about this today, and maybe we'll talk about it next week, but fairly certain that this is the first time, I'm actually almost positive, I just hesitate to say that, so I'm hedging my bet, that first time we've had a president win, lose, win. I don't think there's ever been another president that's done that. I know that Teddy Roosevelt won one, left, came back and lost. But yeah, what an interesting storyline that we are living through. So listen, I guess my final words will be a little bit more heartfelt than flippant. I would say that I know people on both sides of the political spectrum. Some are exuberant and some are wildly depressed. And the truth is, the sun still came up today. We still have to go to work. We still have to do the things that we have to do. And we're still neighbors, brothers, sisters, parents, siblings, whatever the case might be. And what matters is how we treat each other, actually. So whether or not you feel like you won or you feel like you lost, the way you engage with the people around you is going to matter a lot more than whether or not you feel like you won or you lost. So I encourage everybody to be optimistic about the future. And if you don't like the way things are, organize and try to convince your neighbors to see it your way. And if not, if they don't see it your way and you're in the minority, that's a democracy. We have to live in a country where the majority gets to decide. Interestingly enough, which we also didn't cover, it looks like Trump is on track to win the popular vote. So it's not, we can't say it's a minority forcing people through the Electoral College, as that looks like the majority of the people wanted Trump back. So if that isn't you, okay, well, there's always another election, and that's how it works in a democracy, right? Also, if you do like that it was Trump, just realize that there's another election in next year and in 2 years, the midterms, and then also another presidential cycle. So it goes back and forth. Also, by the way, I would just like to add that if you think that 2020 was stolen when there was a Republican president in Republican states, why wouldn't you think? I think this election disproves that, because now it was a Democratic president, Joe Biden. If he stole the first one, why wouldn't he have stolen this one for Kamala? Or why did he even drop out if he knew he could steal it? And again, Josh Shapiro, Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, Gretchen Whitmer, Democratic governor of Michigan, Tony Evers, Democratic governor of Wisconsin, all of these states Trump won. So they could have stolen it if they stole it before. I'm going to go on this rant just really quickly. If you believe it was stolen in 2020, this reality, you might be really happy that Trump won it now. He didn't fucking win in 2020 because if he did, he would have won. It wasn't, nobody stole it from him. He was in charge. Now he's not in charge and he won and everybody's accepting it. This proves your entire point. Anyway, that's my only thing. And it ties into what I said before, because in 2020, you could have lost gracefully, except that sometimes in a democracy, you lose. You're not in the majority. Now you are in the majority. Majority of people want Trump back. You want Trump back? That's great. You're in the majority. Next time you might be in the minority. Just the way it works. Yeah. Please, thank you for watching. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and share. And we do have contests up for what's coming next in the elections and political cycle. We have legislative contest, fantasy sports contest coming up. And we will be announcing whether or not somebody won our $100,000 general election contest very soon. All right. Until then, all right, keep your heads and have fun.
Draft picks in the Senate, game on the floor. Campaign slogans echo final scores. Analysis deep as the trench warfare set. We break it down, no sweat, no net. Balance and touchdowns, where's your bet? Candidate playbooks, lines we set. Irreverent and free, we call it out. Competition fierce, ain't no doubt. And a Hail Mary pass. Legislation touchdowns, who's top class? Elections heated.